in order for it to be valuable, it doesn't always have to be like 50-50 where you get exactly the same thing. You can decide to do things like have referral fees or a referral structure. Some people can think, doesn't that, maybe make it more transactional when you're doing it? To me, it's not. When you've really had the time and the experience to see this is really a great fit, you're providing benefit to them by essentially just delivering them leads, and vice versa. It can just be a way that you both ensure that you get some financial, return from it, and there's good value.
How can strategic partnerships become a key strategy for you in growing your expert based business? Well, that's something I'm passionate about. And I know the person across the mic from me is extremely passionate and has a ton of wisdom to share on this topic and some other topics that we're going to dive into. So, Pamela Slim is someone that I've honestly admired for probably 15 years. I came up through the blogging world and she was always a leader in that space. And I had the really fortunate opportunity. She reached out to me actually on LinkedIn after I did an interview recently with Nathan Barry and complimented me on that, which meant a lot to me. And then we found ourselves sitting next to each other not too long ago at Craft and Commerce. And I felt like we became quick friends. And I said, we really need you to have on the podcast because we love strategic partnerships. And she has so much just tactical strategy to share on this topic. So Pamela, thank you so much for being here first and foremost. Welcome. And please introduce yourself to the audience for those who maybe haven't been following your journey as long as I have.
Yeah, I appreciate following the journey. It's dog years at this point with blog years, but I'm so happy to be here. And the essence of everything that I've probably ever loved and done have been boiled down into two things. One of them is community building. Believe it or not, I challenge you because I have a degree in community development. That was my undergraduate degree in college. So if you think that you've been thinking about it for a long time, I bet mine's been longer. My lens has always been on the community development side, economic development, but really grassroots economic development with lots of collaboration with community partners. So that's manifested through the years in many different ways, everything from studying it, living in Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, doing work there, to running a nonprofit capoeira group, Afro-Brazilian martial arts, where I created a group of 250 youth using ecosystem building principles, to building an online profile, not knowing what the heck I was doing as a blogger, to running a in-person community accelerator and lab in downtown Mesa for 8 years, and then writing a book about the whole thing called The Widest Net. So community has always been a core value, interest, and principle. And the other thing is really in just bringing ideas to life. My best friend calls me a prober, which I don't think is a compliment. She's like, could you meet somebody new and not have them weeping in the first 5 minutes talking about their dream and what they want to bring to life? Like, I can't help myself as a longtime business coach and now agency owner of being interested in ideas and aspirations that people have and in wanting to bring them to life. So that's manifested, being a management consultant for 10 years in Silicon Valley, right at the height of exciting development in the late 90s, 2000s, to being a business coach for 20 years, helping a lot of creators, to now owning an agency where we really help people productize services. So those have been the themes, which have pretty much been steady through the
So cool. Like
decades.
usually, people talk for 10 minutes. I'm trying to tease out the theme or tease out the why, but you're way ahead of the game here. And I did not know that you found your way sort of professionally through economic development and community development as like an area of expertise. I am a civil engineer by trade, but the specialization I got into was traffic engineering and transportation planning. So I spent many hours facilitating and envisioning with community development directors, like the infrastructure side of community development and sustainable development and new urbanism and things like that. So we have a whole other topic we could talk about on a different forum, but I'd never actually thought about that as like why I care so much about community collaboration and facilitation today. You closed the gap for yourself, but you totally closed it for me too. So thank you. So that's great.
My job is done. I actually did a project for the Department of Transportation in Mesa about community engagement around transportation planning. So it's so cool that people don't often think about those
Yeah.
applications, but a lot of the jobs about what we take for granted and places in our community that just have a good vibe, for example, is often because really specifically people have thought about the particular mix of businesses and how to pull people in, or, yeah, how to have walking paths here in Arizona, how to have shade. So it's so cool. There's so many different ways to use those skills.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's super cool. Well, I want to spend most of our time today actually walking through some strategy around collaboration and strategic partnerships. And I know you're the person to talk about with that. Before we do that, you mentioned you have an agency, you've written numerous books, you grew up, quote unquote, as a blogger. As far as like your online presence goes, I'd love to just kind of hear a snapshot today, like what you're doing with your business, what you're excited about, and then that'll kind of lay the groundwork as we start talking about partnerships for the audience.
Sure. So, what I found, I love the work that I've done. I'm one of those annoying people that has never really had a career existential crisis.
I'm
Other ones,
happy
don't
with my
worry.
work.
But I understand how for a lot of people they've struggled around what they do. I've always loved what I've done. I love the people that I work with. And really, the agency came from being a business coach for 20 years, working with really smart, amazing experts, thought leaders. And I found that my background is in training and development professionally. When the thread of really the building of what I did in my professional life. And so I would find a lot of them were wanting to scale. They were really booked with, let's say, workshops or keynote speaking, and they wanted to scale, but they didn't know how to create licensing and certification programs. And for me, it's like, I was like, well, doesn't everybody know that? And I learned that no, not everybody knows that. That's you weirdos who do training and development design for 30 years. So I realized it was harder to coach people about how to do it, and more wanted to build an agency where we would work with people. I really understand the thought leader space. I've lived it in my own journey, and really wanted to have this mix of helping people to be building scalable products, things like licensing certification programs that would allow them to bring out their work at scale. Again, scale can be different for different people. I see the seven figure appearing above your head right in your office. So we love that. Money is amazing. For some people, that's a core driver, and they have a big number. Maybe they have multiple zeros. In the hundreds of millions
Yeah.
of dollars. Somebody like our friend
Yep.
Nathan, he's at 45, but like I wouldn't be shocked if he got to 100 or even
Yeah.
five down the road. For other people, they really just want to scale the impact. So that's what we do. We work with people to help package their services. And really, the approach of having productized services, I have learned, is really a fundamental shift in thinking for some of our creative folks. And I consider myself one of them, where sometimes we just like, I call us the don't fence me in people. We're just like, I'm free and creative, and like, don't fence me in with SOPs and operations until we find that we're like laying by the side of the road exhausted. And then we're like, oh, maybe I should. So I think there's a good balance of harvesting creative energy, but also not giving up a lot of value that we built over the years in our thought leadership, and really packaging them and learning how to sell them effectively so that we get financial return, but also like we let our great ideas and processes be deeper embedded in the
Yeah.
world. So that's the part that's really
Really cool.
exciting to me, is doing that
Yeah,
translation.
I'd love to camp out here for just a moment. I think it like all things kind of lead to partnership in my mind and collaboration. But I think this is important too, because if someone's listening, they're like, look, I do one-on-one coaching, I'm kind of maxed out. Like, what do I need partnerships? Like, why do I need? Because there is no path to scale, and so one of the fundamental
Yeah,
things to make yourself both attractive to partners and to be able to benefit from strategic partnerships is having a business model that supports that. So I'd love to hear more, like if like who's your ideal client, and when they come to work with your agency, what's a typical outcome? It sounds like people are already an expert, they've got some proven concept, they're doing work, but they don't yet have a certification program or a licensing, the ability to license that and scale that without them doing the fulfillment. Is that fair? And yeah, just maybe you walk us through your typical client journey, and I'd love to learn more.
for sure. So two folks people are probably well familiar with. Susan Cain was a client who wrote the great book Quiet, about the power of introverts. I worked with her a number of years ago to create, at that point, what she called the Quiet Revolution, that had a number of different footprints. One was the Quiet Leadership Institute, which took the principles of how to really be educating about really how to embrace the incredible strengths of introverts because there's an extrovert
Yeah,
bias. Susan would always say it's one of the last, frontiers of diversity and inclusion that we don't realize what an extrovert bias is. And so we built a whole curriculum for the Quiet Leadership Institute. We actually did a licensing project with Steelcase, which is makes office furniture to create quiet spaces by Susan Kane, which was a great example of leveraging key IP and ideas into an actual physical design of office spaces. I thought that was
that's
so
really
cool. Susan is amazing. So that was an amazing project. Jay Papasan, who both of us mentioned, I think he's been on the show, is a great friend, incredible thought leader. Many people know his book, The One Thing. And so we worked with him and his team to do a blueprint for
okay.
certification where they really are able to be certifying people in their method that helps people to have really wonderful strategic focus, productivity, flow. And so there are people like that who have sold millions of books who are incredible. We also have really specialized experts that we work with. So, doctors or neuroscientists that have a really specific kind of IP. Usually, the indicators, this is for you if you're listening to it, when you're really ready for licensing and certification, is if you sell B2B, which tends to be most of our clients. We love the B2B market and people who sell to big
Yep,
companies. But your client is saying, like, we love your work. We want to bring it to all 2,000 managers. Or wouldn't it be amazing if we could include this program into our new employee orientation or whatever the thing is? So that's an indicator that there is a deeper market for what you have to sell. For people to know the distinction between like selling certifications business to large companies versus B2C. You mentioned you were story brand
yeah,
certified,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
It's not a secret, I'm hoping.
no,
You said before we started rolling, but that's a great example of a really strong B2C engagement, right? Anybody who's, a coach, consultant, or somebody inside a company could sign up, be certified, get the tools to be a practitioner of that brand and that
yep,
methodology. When you're selling B2B, think about it like you're installing your method like into the operating system of the organization. So you might design a train the trainer program where they have internal folks and then they have a license to use your materials with a number of different end users that's really determined, by them. And so we always say B2B is longer sales cycles and bigger
yeah, yeah,
checks. It's often a lot harder to get a machine rolling when you're selling B2C. It's like the hungry ghost, I think is the metaphor I think
yeah,
about sometimes. You get excited, you have a bunch of people buy, and then all of a sudden you're always looking for like, I need tens of thousands more people to come
yep,
in to keep that going. And we know people in the space who are genius at doing it. For other people, and I find many experts that we work with, it actually is a better fit where they're doing keynotes in front of B2B audiences. They're in front of people who have many thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of employees. So I like to always raise that because I find in our creator spaces, sometimes we're only talking about that B2C model. And a lot of people are sitting back going, God, man, that just sounds like a lot of work. And I don't know if I'm really cut out for that. There's ways to scale uh, when you sell
yeah.
B2B.
That's really interesting. Even the what you call B2C and B2B, I think, is enlightening for me and for the audience because I think because of the way I came up through this world, like me, B2C is like I sell to an end consumer, like business to consumer. Like I used to sell meat sticks, like selling meat sticks to Joe down the street is a B2C transaction, whereas selling my meat sticks into a retailer who will resell them to a bunch of people is B2B. And that's true. However, the distinction you're making is even my business model, where I would probably call it B2B because the people I sell to have businesses, but they're often entrepreneur, solopreneur, founder led businesses, but it's still effectively a one-to-one transaction, right? Like every client's a new client. And after that, I need the next new client. So you're calling that B2C in the context of the scale at which you're seeing the world, whereas B2B is more what I would call like corporate sales, right? Like I come into Microsoft, like I would totally think of StoryBrand as a B2B business, but
Yep.
you're saying B2C in the way that you see this because StoryBrand can and does sell to Microsoft. And then they can like, hey, Microsoft, for the next 4 years, let's do brand scripts on let's empower your people to do brand scripts, which is like one of their proprietary things for all of your new products. Like that's a B2B transaction where selling to Dustin to get him certified for a single transaction is a B2C in the way that you're talking about this, right?
Exactly. And for purpose of simplicity, I tend to put it in those two camps. We also can say B to small b or B to SMB. So there is a nuance that you get into, but it often is exactly as you talked about. When you think pragmatically about it, you have to get somebody usually on your email list. You want to be nurturing them, working with them to have an individual person or a business owner who is making that
Yes.
sale. And it's one of the interesting things about the small business market, the solopreneur and the SMB market. The Small Business Administration defines small businesses up to, I think, $10
Yes.
million,
Easy
500 employees and $10
for
million.
us. Yeah.
For many people in the creator space is like, are you kidding me? Like that's my life aspiration. But for them, it is kind of fun to think about scale that way because in many ways, a lot of the activity that's happening, from zero to that 10 million a year and 500 employees is there's so much activity that's there. I did a lot of work in the SaaS space with SaaS companies who sell into that market. And that's one of their big challenges, which actually will back right into our
Right.
partner strategy. The way that they can understand how to connect and sell to people is by definition often through strategic partnerships because it's so fragmented trying to find all the little corners of the internet where you can find that person who wants your CRM software, right? Or has awareness about using QuickBooks or something like that.
And that's actually what I was going to say too. Is like I'm really glad we sort of set these definitions. We'll call it B2B, B2C, corporate or individual SMB, small business sales. I think that's important because as we get into the different questions I have around partnerships, we don't have to hit both of those for each question, but it'll give context because I think there's applications made that people don't think about in both those. They're like,
Yes.
oh, I only sell to corporations.
Yes.
Well, you could scale out this way if you had a more direct consumer approach. Or I think most people that are listening to this only think about selling individual productized services, coaching, consulting to individuals. But what if there was this huge opportunity that you're not seeing in a corporate environment? And I put myself in that camp. Like even as we're talking, I'm like, this is a great thought exercise, even for the work that I do. So, all right, well, Pamela, that's awesome. I think we got a really good feel for why you do what you do and your background and kind of what your agency's up to. It's a really unique agency model, a really unique emphasis. I think that's awesome. So I kind of have three questions that we're going to work through here on the partnership strategy. I showed this to Pamela before we started recording, but I actually received this hat earlier this year, and this stands for collaboration over competition. And that's really how I see the world. But this was actually the theme of a small conference I got to speak at. And when I saw that, I was like, oh, other people think this way too. And then after talking to Pamela at Craft and Commerce, I'm like, she is way down the road thinking about this. And she's going to be a huge resource for our audience. So, collaboration, partnership, whatever word you like to assign to that. We're going to talk about how to identify and connect with the right partners. Two, we're going to talk about how to create like a win-win partnership. Like, how do we make this actually work after you find someone you think that would be a good candidate for it? And then three, what's the long-term version of success so that the partnerships aren't a one-off situation that compound over time and become a really key asset of your business. So with that, I'd love to give the floor to you, Pamela, and we can just start talking about how do you identify and connect with the right partners?
Yes. So conceptually, I think it's helpful to ground us in very much the like collaboration versus competition. And I'm actually a
I am
competitive
too.
person. So there's nothing wrong with competition. Did martial arts for 18 years. Like I love
My
to
wife
win. You know what I mean?
taking me to
Like
game nights because I'm like, I just want to win. Like I don't like games that have no like strategy. Like I want to win. But yeah, so I'm also competitive and unlike you, I also see the world totally through a lens of collaboration opportunities. So yeah.
exactly. So sometimes I think, when certain people hear it, and we know there can be judgment, especially for our competitive folks who are listening, who are like, what are we talking about here? Collaboration. But really in a lens of thinking about how it is that you're setting up, you're orienting yourself towards work. I call it empire culture. So we actually use empire building words when we talk about building a business. I want to crush my competitor. I'm building an empire without really thinking about it. If we look a little bit historically at what empires have done, they've been super great for a few people at the very
Yeah.
top, really not so great. And most other people that are like underneath the wheels of the tanks that are rolling in, right? Or in the old days, the stone
Yeah.
wheels. So there is point of view of domination, of having one person who's really at the center, more of a right and wrong. And we tend to use more transactional language often when we're talking about our audience or clients. So we'll talk about fans and followers, um, uh, users, conversions. You've probably been backstage like I have, where you might have somebody really dynamic and compelling on stage who's just emoting emotion. And then they get back and they're like, what did I close? How many people are taking out their
Yeah.
credit cards? Again, money is awesome. Love money, love to win. But there can just be a little bit of a different vibe when you're thinking about empire culture. The way that you set up marketing wise often there is where you are making a distinction that I really am that sole expert. You might be taking shots specifically at other competitors. You can have sometimes the feeling, it's like everything has a shadow side, right? It has a strength and a shadow side. The shadow side can be, wait a minute, Dustin, like, I first worked with you. You could say to me, like, I made you, Pam Slim, like I taught you everything you know. Now you're guesting on podcasts everywhere. You can't go and work with somebody else. Like, if you do, you're like betraying
Yeah.
me as a mentor. And like, there's some of that vibe that just doesn't feel
Yeah.
good. By contrast, when you have an ecosystem model, you center your ideal client in the center of an ecosystem. And in the widest net, there's 10 specific segments to that ecosystem that we can dig into a couple of them in a minute. But think about it like your ideal client defined by problem, challenge, or aspiration, right? We actually share ideal
Yeah.
clients, experts who want to scale with ease, who love collaboration, but who need a very specific tactical way in order to reach an
Yeah.
audience. And so when we look at ways that that ideal client is trying to solve their problem of growing their business and probably growing their revenue, having more impact, they already have an ecosystem around them of products that they're using, experts that they're listening to, podcasts like this one that they're listening to, conferences they're going to, like you and I sit next to each other at Craft and Commerce, all were places where they're looking for information, resources, ideas, coaching, support to help them reach their goal. So to me, it's the easiest, most strategic way. If I want to figure out, like, okay, I want to reach those people, you want to reach those people, why don't we look at who is, depending if you're Marvel or DC, the either Justice League of the experts around that ecosystem? So if there is one conference I would go to a year, what would
Yeah.
that be? What is the podcast that would be the best fit for me to be a guest? Because we both share that ideal audience. And really importantly, we share values about how it is that we want to treat that
Yeah.
person. That's one of the lenses that we'll talk about in a sec in that follow up of like, how do you really know? First, there's just like who potentially could be partners who are serving the same audience. That next step is who would be somebody who I'd actually be super excited to be sharing with my client as somebody who they should
Yeah.
work with, or to say, like, you have to read this book. Tiny
Yep.
Experiments. We both
Yep.
saw the incredible speaker who just wrote Tiny Experiments. I'm obsessed by it. I'm reading the book in the pool. I'm listening to it on my walks. I'm just like, everybody I know needs to read that book, including all your
Absolutely.
listeners. So that's what happens when you first have that analysis that our job as fellow ecosystem partners, you, me,
Yep.
Kit, all the other people, right, who are serving that audience, our sole job is to solve the problems of our audience in the most direct, quick, and cost effective way possible. Right. So when we know that, then our job strategically is to find the best people that we define based on our values and how we know our clients that are those partners. I call them PB&J partners, peanut butter and jelly partners, people with highly complementary but non-competitive
Yeah.
skills. That's in the very tactical path of somebody who you would refer on a really regular basis. Like for me, Autumn Whit Boyd is an IP attorney. At this stage, who knows how many people that I have referred to her, because every single client that we work with needs to have a licensing agreement and IP protection when they're building their certification or licensing program. So those are examples. And then the last thing I'll say before I stop is when you do have an ecosystem point of view as well, I said PB&J partners are people with highly complementary but non-competitive offerings because, we all need to make a living. So we can't just always be referring somebody who basically does the same thing that we do. However, what makes us the best at our game is where we do build friendly relationships with people who do share our values, who can be directly in our same field of
Yep.
expertise. I have a lot of really specific longtime friends. Sometimes we know because we share with each other that a potential client is talking with each of us about working with each of us, but I can feel completely great. Charlie Gilkey is one person like that for me at Productive Flourishing. Like if they work with Charlie, they are in the best
Yep.
hands. He feels the same way. If they choose to work with me, they're in the best hands. So that's that part, I think, even with collaboration, because again, our job is to keep us all fresh and to keep us focused. So if we find, gosh, Charlie is much better than me in this area, instead of trying to get much better myself, I might say, what am I totally uniquely qualified in so that I can sharpen that area of
Yeah.
expertise?
Wow. That's amazing. I wrote, so many post-it notes from that. And this is an area I'm already really passionate about. I feel like I'm pretty knowledgeable about, but that was very useful. Like the framework's really useful of like empire versus ecosystem. And I think pretty much our exclusive our audience. I'm sure there's a few rogue folks in there. I think most of them are more ecosystem thinkers because that's the value system I carry, and that's those are the guests I have on, and like that's kind of how we conduct ourselves. But even if you're really set up as like an ecosystem business and thinker, and that you really value that, I think we can all find ourselves slipping into empire temptations or moments, or like even like I'm thinking about this offer, but if you step back and look at it, you're like, is that really serving my client at the center? Or is this kind of a little bit of a selfish take on ego? Like I think we can be driven by our ego a little too much over into empire world. So empire and ecosystem, I love that. I know that's a core part of the widest net and the
Yeah.
IP that you have there with the book. So yeah, so ideal client at the center, looking for ways to help them directly, looking at who already serves them in a different way, and being comfortable with the fact that there's going to be some overlap. So your Charlie Gilkey, I think, is like my John Meese. He and I are each other's top referral partners. We're both in each other's communities. We both are like embedded in each other's trainings. And there are not a small number of people who make decisions between working with me or him, because we do have some overlap in the work that we do. Our view on it is like, which one should they start with? Because they really need both of our expertise, but there's definitely some overlap, right? And so I love that this is not a all or nothing. It's like you're PB&J or you're a direct competitor. If you're a direct competitor, I can't know you, like you, be friends with you, or refer to you. You still can, but obviously it's not quite as seamless as the PB&J relationships. Um, Anything else on? I think that sets a great frame. Anything maybe tactically on identifying the right partners, and maybe we could talk a little bit about sort of the B2B aspect of this versus the B2B
Yeah.
aspect of the scale at which we're trying to find partners.
For sure. So, on one hand, it is strategically depending on the type of business that somebody is in. Typically, if it's a service business where, coach, consultant, expert selling your services, that there are key areas there in the 10 segments of the ecosystem wheel. And that can be things like associations that are made up of groups of people that could fit within your ideal audience. Associations is sort of a supercharged area for a lot of people where, let's say you create a core webinar and you're selling to, you know, I don't know, accountants or something like that, right? Like there's so many different, there's probably the American Association of Accountants and the International Association, and each one has a chapter. So you can create very copy paste kinds of ways of getting in front of people. And often when you're really successful in a local area or a region, it's easier for you to get a national stage. The associations have done a great job at really, aggregating lots of people
Yes.
together. So there's core areas like that, or products. I am a big fan of software companies that create conferences. Another shout out to Kit, because they have done so much work and they often have more resource in order to be finding that exact right stage of person. And it's also, you see, there's something about the vibe. You're like, why does it feel so good when I'm at this conference? It's because they have thought about things like, who are the people who are going to be the most exciting for others? So some of the super sections of the ecosystem map really are related to people who have done a great job one to many at like doing some of that strategic work for you. So you and I were probably like running around chasing after some of the speakers and talking to them because you're like, thanks, Nathan and Haley and the Kit
Yes.
team, for assembling a great list of people who probably could be good podcast guests, people to talk
Yep.
to. Okay, so the B2B application is really similar It is just focusing on the area of the ecosystem wheel where your ideal client is. So, in one hand, if you have an ideal client that uses products or services from a larger company, then your partnerships that you would look for would be like partnerships with a software company that serves your market. I remember one year I used to go to South by Southwest every year. It's an amazing watering hole, like on steroids. You have everybody and everything and every brand who's there. I knew at that point, that was a number of, probably a decade ago, and I was more in my escape from Cubicle Nation days and, working with entrepreneurs, but also had a lot of expertise within the training world. And I was helping a lot of people build courses and things like that for my clients. So I specifically challenged myself not to go meet with all my friends who I knew who'd be really fun to hang out with, but to go in the bloggers lounge that was like, ground zero for a place where a lot of the brands were hanging out with people. And so I met some folks from what was then
Yeah.
Citrix, now LogMeIn, that make the go-to training and go-to meeting products. Made that introduction. I felt a little weird at first, as one does, right? Because it's not as comfortable as talking to a fellow blogger or something, somebody who knew my work. But in that relationship building from that one point, I ended up doing tens of thousands of dollars worth of work with them where I created ebooks for them and I did webinars and I did brand content partnerships. Little side note for folks that sometimes when we think about working with larger companies or brands, we only think about it from the influencer side. Sometimes there's, you might have a really big audience. A brand approaches you because essentially they just want to sell more seats or sell more of their
Yeah.
product, which means that you have to have a really large audience and you have to be really good at selling other people's products. And not everybody has that good, ability. A different type of brand partnership can be where you really are an expert who is creating compelling content for their audience. Or if you're a great speaker and you really connect with their audience, you could be somebody who's speaking to their audience. You could come in as a keynote speaker. It's a great way when you're planning the best places for you to be is maybe look at companies. We know, Salesforce and Kit and a whole number of other companies have large conferences where they're aggregating other people. So that's one of the ways that you find who it is that you are looking for is what are the products that your ideal clients are using. It's a bit of a different calculation if you find that you are a creator who's typically been selling, B2C or selling to very small shops, and you think that your method has an application in business. So in that case, your ideal client definition would
Yeah.
change. One can have different ecosystem maps that would actually look quite different. One of my clients, longtime clients and friends, Ben Fanning, actually does a lot of podcast coaching and delivery for B2B companies. So, like for CEOs and for larger companies, where he'll produce podcasts and, talk about that. He came from a long history of being in senior leadership within a B2B world. He actually was excited like everybody was back in the day of helping everybody quit like
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was writing escape but then he ended up finding out like wait a minute, it's not for everybody. A lot of people want to stay, and he wrote the quit alternative. And so he started to really do talks more about how people can engage and retain talent, and then expanding on that when he started podcasting himself and realized a lot of his senior leaders were interested in that, either as a form of engagement or thought leadership or brand building. That was a way that he applied that. That would be a very different case when we think about who you're centering. So let's say you're centering a dynamic CEO who really wants to be more of a thought leader. The places in person or online where he or she are looking for resources, support, information, products is going to be completely different from the ecosystem for maybe your individual, solopreneur creator. So that's why you have to ask some distinct questions. And early on, when you foray into it, is often just directly asking people who fit that profile, what's your favorite podcast? If you could go to one conference a year, what would it be? What was your favorite business book related to like the thing maybe you can help them do, in the last year? And that's the way you start to gather the data. I will just say, as a business coach, because I can't help myself, it is very, very, very hard to serve both the B2C and B2B audiences well in the long
Yeah.
run. Whether you're going from B2B and selling more to individuals, I would just say small experiments, test and try. A lot of people do not realize the time, money, and energy it takes to build that. Vice versa. A lot of folks can get very frustrated with how long a sales cycle takes. So experimenting is great, but there are very distinct business building activities that you do if you're selling B2B versus
Yeah.
B2C.
I love that you said that because my, quick start entrepreneurial brain is like, man, I'm doing the B2C, like that's going really well. But what would it be like to sell, a huge contract to this one company? And what you said is totally true. Even the distinction that they're two different ecosystem maps, right? Like that's a whole different business model, right? It's a whole different ideal client. It's a whole different set of partnerships. It's a whole different sales cycle. There's a lot that would go into crossing that line. But I think it's
Yeah.
really healthy, whichever line you choose to be, whichever side of the line you choose to be on. It's really healthy to think about the other side of the line and how that would work and what opportunities are over there. I think that because it makes you better, even if you never actually cross the chasm. Um, well, that was awesome. And so, if people want to go deeper on finding partnerships and connecting with partners, obviously they got to go get the widest net book and go through the full 10 pieces of the ecosystem. We just touched on a couple, and I got a ton of value from that. Um,
And what just so you know, I have a workbook with all the exercises of the book that I'll give you that we can put in the show notes. So that can be a nice shortcut where it is a method. So that way if people are interested in working through it, there's an easy way to do
yeah,
that. So I'll make sure to shoot that over as soon as
I
we're done.
appreciate that. People will, including myself, will love that. So, all right, well, we'll go a little quicker here because I think identifying and kind of getting the framework around what a partnership is and where we would look, I think that's probably the most challenging part. But now let's focus on the second question, which is we've like, hey, we found Kit or we found this other creator who serves our audience in a really complementary way. What are How do we approach actually creating the partnership? Like, what does a win-win partnership look like to where we're both winning by collaborating and working together?
There's a principle I call listen first and then like participate second and then collaborate third. I've really just written more about the listen first part, but they do fall in a line. So that means when you do find somebody who you think is really interesting, really lean in and like listen to their podcast interviews, what it is that they're writing, follow them on LinkedIn. There's just taking the time to be aware of who somebody is. That has two benefits. You really get to know their body of work a lot better, and you can see over time, how is it that they're really coming across? Do you feel like you get those good signals that can be value indicators for you that things really are a good
Yeah,
fit? So at first, just take the time to get to know somebody, because it just would feel weird for either of us if somebody just showed up and is like, I don't really know what the heck you do, but I think we should do
yeah,
something
yeah,
together. That's like 99% of the unsolicited cold, well, very poorly crafted LinkedIn outreaches.
yes,
Or my other favorite, which is anybody you want to meet in my network, I'm happy to
yeah,
introduce you. And I'm thinking, you don't know who I
yeah,
am, but are you sure? I mean, I think I'm a pretty cool person, but you don't know
yeah,
that. So first you want to listen and watch. Then you want to participate actively. For me, I had been a long time keep customer Infusionsoft. I'm a brand loyalist to the end, sometimes to my own folly. I adore the founders. I know everybody. They're here in Phoenix. Like I just stay with them for a long time past when the product was really a good fit for
yeah,
me. When I knew that I was excited about connecting more with a Kit community, and after I met Nathan actually at a mastermind, then I became a customer. Now, I was planning it anyway because it was a better fit for the product, but for me to actually go in and use the product and have familiarity with what they're doing was really important. The other thing was showing up and attending the conference, because not as a speaker, but as somebody who's really, attending and getting value and participating. The other thing I think is showing up fully where, let's say it's somebody you think is really great, another service provider, where it's feasible, you might actually use their services, or you want to, lean in. If they're having an event, you might share about it, you attend, and then really show up fully, participate, give feedback, add value. And then I think from that is where then you can start to see, are there actually ways in which we can start to collaborate? Because you know more about what they're about. and they've had more of an experience with you, you're more familiar territory, and then you can start to experiment with ways to work. I just did some work with Pat Flynn, who I know you had on here too last year, in his amazing SPI community. We've crossed paths for ever and ever and ever, right? In over the internet, I've always had great respect for him. We did this fun collaboration for about 9 months or so, where I was an expert in residence within his community, and it was just a great way for me to know more what he's doing. It reaffirmed everything I had felt before, that he is one of the kindest, smartest, most amazing people I've ever known, which made me more excited to be referring. And then, who knows? There's other things hopefully in the future that we can be doing when we
Yes.
collaborate. The mistake I find a lot of people make is all of us get excited about seeing the potential for a partnership and not spending time listening and then just participating and supporting before we go right to the partnership side. Remember, when you're partnering with someone, specifically sharing them with your audience and your clients, you are endorsing them in many ways. And your clients can have a brand experience, even if it's not your fault. If you mean, right, you might refer somebody directly just to work with somebody else. And when you make those referrals, it is important to say, I've had a great experience working with this person. Some other clients have, but it's different for different people. So if for some reason it's not a good fit, I won't be offended. I'd love to know, because I do refer this person often. But that way, somebody could have a negative experience with that person, and then it somehow kind of comes back on your brand as well. That's sometimes the challenging part of it, but that's the way that I like approaching it. It takes more time to simmer. It's like a European slow meal, as opposed to a slamming down a In-N-Out burger in 5 minutes like we do here in the U.S. What's wrong with us?
Fewer partnerships that are better, quality over quantity, depth over breadth. I mean, yeah, this is really good. It's very timely. Like, I love partnerships, and to this point, a lot of them have happened personally. It's like, Pat Flynn's example. I was also an expert in residence, and I've been able to go deeper in that relationship. But like, they've sort of been sourced personally because that's just how things have been. And I thought in the future, part of the scaling of my business. So what if I had a partnerships director, like someone who is proactively looking for great partnerships? And I do think that's a good idea. But what you said is also super important. Like, a significant part of their role is actually not just finding people and then saying we should be partners, but vetting them in the sense of listening, understanding their values, participating in their events, communities, workshops, even their social media, interactions and things like that, so that you really know it's a good fit before you make that ask and actually commit to a partnership. Because partnerships are awesome when they go well, and they're not so good when they don't, right? And so I think that's probably like the most valuable thing we could share on how to create a win-win partnership, is how to approach them, how to be smart about it. Do you have like a sort of a rapid fire list of just like types of partnerships, like webinars and email swaps, and like, like any of that, just like real tactically, just kind of a running list to get people's wheels turning on how you can partner with another individual?
Yeah, I think, some of the core ones, I do think of just the classic PB&J referrals, which tend to be a referral partner specifically defined in that, in the work that you do with clients, this person is absolutely necessary. Like
Yeah.
almost every engagement, you're going to be referring this person, because it just means you're going to have the volume
Yeah.
of it, and you find that person also would have the same situation. Again, in order for it to be valuable, it doesn't always have to be like 50-50 where you get exactly the same thing. You can decide to do things like have referral fees or a referral structure. Some people can think, doesn't that, maybe make it more transactional when you're doing it? To me, it's not. When you've really had the time and the experience to see this is really a great
Yeah.
fit, you're providing benefit to them by essentially just delivering them leads, and vice versa. It can just be a way that you both ensure that you get some financial, return from it, and there's good value. So that can be a possibility. But that's one type, or these PB&J partners where you're constantly referring them. Everybody's asking. There can be brand partnerships. So you want to specifically work with a company that sells a product or service, where you are either, if you are one of those influencer types, I'm jealous of you because, at first I thought I wanted to be that person, but then I realized I'm just more of a little bit of a smaller circle, know a lot of
Same thing.
people, and content person. I love to create more content. So either you do the influencer where you're, doing a promotion on your email to sell somebody's product, or you are actually developing content for that, maybe doing webinars, things like
Yeah.
that. And then there are creative collaborations between creators where you can see things like, people doing a course together, or Chris Gillibo and I, did the $100 startup
Yeah.
for a whole number of different years, together, of like co-teaching that class for many years. And those can be ways in which you have those collaborations that are built on IP. The one thing I'll say about that, and my lawyer and dear friend Kyle Durand will back me up, is that you absolutely want to be clear from an IP perspective. Most people don't know this, but if you get excited, a lot of things that happen, like at a conference, you and I were sitting next to each other. We're like, oh my God, you do that, I do this. And then we say, like, let's put on a show, let's write an
Right.
ebook. And so we can get way down the road, we create it, we publish it. Even if we have not officially executed a business agreement, we are officially business partners, and the IP is the property of the partnership. Now, if we got, persnickety with each other, we could end up in this protracted battle that, like, well, you can't use my stuff, and you would say the same to me. So always specify the ownership of the IP. I think a generous way of looking at it is that both people can fully use it with attribution to the others, and then have a back out way in your partnership contract where, if for whatever reason either one of you decides to dissolve the partnership, you know exactly what the steps are, what's the amount you might, buy out the person for. And Kyle always says that it's based on really preserving the
Yeah.
relationship when you have those things in place. So those are, I think, overall, like you said, there's all kinds of different ways that you can be partnering with people, but those are some
Yeah.
common ways for
They're really good.
creators.
Um, as we're looking to wind down, I do want to hit the third point, but I think we've actually covered a lot of it. So maybe we'll put a fine tooth comb through it a little bit. But like, how do you make a partnership or collaboration successful for the long term? I think a big part of that is everything we've already talked about, like identifying the right types of partners and then listening and participating before you even get into the partnership. Then when you enter into a partnership, having very clear rules as far as like compensation, like if it's an affiliate or a referral, paid referral thing. But if you're doing like a joint thing, like very clear ownership of the IP because you're in a partnership, whether you intended to or not. Like that's a really huge takeaway here. Um, but what else would you add to that? Like if you think of some of your best long-term partners, and like how do you continue to nurture and make this compounding effect so you're not constantly sourcing new partners, but I'm kind of viewing this like you grow your inner circle and it grows with you over time, as long as your business kind of stays in the same arena.
Yeah. So a couple things. One of them is look at it like any other relationship you have in your life. So friendships or any kind of, romantic partnership you have, that it takes time, energy, and attention. And I think what a lot of people really want is to know that you care about them, that you're thinking about them, you have regular communication. And that is something on the business side that you want to plan for. So make sure that you have regular touch points in which you're connecting with them. Very specifically, if you have, I remember the old days of Twitter, as my client called it, where I'm no longer on the platform, but in the old days, like I remember you could create your short lists of like people that you making lists, people you can follow. I'm not sure if you can do that on LinkedIn. If not, we need to make them
Yeah,
do that because
I
that's
think you
so
can. It would be
effective.
super useful to actually be able to select who you want to interact with because it's pretty rare.
Right? Just have, a short list, but you can do your workaround where you do pay attention to the things that your partner is doing. So you make sure that you are on a regular basis, kind of promoting their work and doing that. The other thing is where you actually always have a restart button, and it's one of these meta principles. It's like I tell my team, I love literally every single person on my team so much, and I appreciate them, and they are all so talented. I want them to never leave me ever and go anywhere else. And when I'm out of my needy mom mode, just like I'm about to be an empty nester, like actually, I want them to be satisfied and creative, and financially abundant and to go where they need to go. So any partnership, as great as it is, can and will come to a natural end, which is why you do want to make sure you have regular conversations. Is this still working for you? Is there, anything that's changed that we really need to address? This is where we see really even if you're working with a company, kind of the personal and professional side, stuff can happen for people that really impact their ability to deliver. They go through a divorce or, you know, things like that happen where maybe it's a partner who had been like really putting in like half the effort, just like you, I'm meaning, holding up their 50% partnership kind of effort like you, and then all of a sudden things happen where they're no longer doing that. And so maybe you're still fully delivering. And those are the kind of conversations that you need to have. It made me think of another piece of content I will share with
All
your
right.
audience, which was actually an ebook that Kyle, my lawyer, and my best friend Desiree did. This is Meta because it was for Citrix.
Oh,
So this was one of the ebooks that I produced for them. And so, but it's all about how to create partnerships. So there's a lot of good philosophical information in the beginning, and then there's some good technical information as well about different types of agreements to put in place and the kinds of questions to ask. I should have thought about it before, but now this could be the perfect fit,
talking
man.
and Pamela just keeps giving us gifts. So it's working out. No, this is awesome. So wow, well, I've learned a ton. I know and it's also opened my eyes into like how deep this can go. Both from a technical standpoint, like you're saying, there's like a lot of stuff you should know if you're going to go deep in this world. But yeah, I think we share so many values, not only in collaboration and partnerships, but the idea of like quality over quantity and going deep when you're going to go in versus just trying to hit a bunch of surface level, passive sort of relationships, like actually be an active participant and therefore have good communication and ongoing communication and have an exit plan or a restart button, as you said. Like these are all like such good principles. And covered some really amazing tactics like plugging into associations, thinking about the products that your ideal clients use, and how can you be in that ecosystem through conferences or guest training or podcasting or whatever, So this has been amazing, Pamela. So I'm sure people want to go deeper. So whether they want to know more about the partnerships idea and or your agency and your ability to help them scale through their IP and through certifications and licensing, to tell us the next best step, and we'll send people that way.
For sure. Everything is at PamelaSlim.com. So if you do, we have a fun quiz. If you're like where you are in the productizing your service business journey, that's right there on the homepage. So you can find it when you click over to PamelaSlim.com. And then I also have all my books listed, but you can find the widest net anywhere books are sold. My good buddy Lucas, who is from AI Daddy, which I love that brand name. He's an amazing AI consultant, and he's created custom like widest net workbook chat box, which we're just putting a couple little bows on. So what I plan on doing is probably have that like on my homepage and just as a resource for people to play with. So it's basically taking the content from the workbook and allowing you to more chat where it can just give you a little bit more coaching. And we're loading up some of my books and so forth. It just gives you a little more precision. I love to experiment with things like that. So I'll see where it is. I could maybe just give you the like current version to share with people and just know listeners that if you're listening right away, maybe it's not going to work perfectly, but you can just hit me up and let me know. But those are the kind of innovations that I really like because really for the widest net, my main desire is that more people have a strategic way in which it's easier for them to find partners. And it really is laid out in the way that I've built communities for 30 years. And it really works. So I hope people find it
I'm sure
valuable.
they will. I know I will. I'll be taking that quiz and playing with your AI daddy creation for the net. And I think that's awesome. So PamelaSlim.com is like the easy button here. Like go over there, get all the things. Contact Pamela and her agency if you're really thinking about scaling out your company and your IP. And if you want to know all things partnerships, the widest net is obviously the go-to resource there. So Pamela, I'm really grateful that you carved out the time and shared so much here. You're just an open book of knowledge and love and wisdom. And I'm really grateful that we got to connect and look forward to future partnerships and collaborations wherever those may bring us. So thanks for being here.
Same. Thanks so much for having me.